has accepted that Egyptian-Qatari ceasefire proposal, but we're also hearing from an Israeli official that the proposal includes far-reaching conclusions that Israel does not agree to. So where are we? Back to square one?
Well, the Israelis, on one hand, seem to be suggesting they haven't seen the proposal, but are also rejecting it. So I think we'll need to get a bit of clarity on that. I think all eyes on Doha, on Qatar at the moment, because that is where a phone call took place, we understand, between Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political bureau of Hamas, and the Qatari Prime Minister. And that phone call was where Haniyeh told the Qatari Prime Minister that a deal, that they had accepted the deal. The crux, though, what we don't know is what deal, precisely what terms Hamas has agreed to, and whether or not that represents a moving of the goalposts, which will allow Israel to say, we don't accept this, or whether it is the proposal that the Israelis put on the table a few days ago. That much detail is clearly absolutely crucial, and we don't have detail on it. Now, the CIA director, Bill Burns, has been at the heart of these negotiations. Sometimes, and there have been so many moments over the course of the past 6 months or so where we have felt that we are close to a deal. Sometimes these negotiations have involved Hamas and the Israelis. Sometimes either Hamas or the Israelis have not turned up. One side has, the other side hasn't. But at the heart of the negotiations, at the heart of the table where these negotiations have been taking place, are the Qataris, who have a unique position, really, in having a hotline to Hamas. Many of the political factions of Hamas are based in Qatar. They have a hotline to Hamas, and they are also very, very close, very aligned to the Americans as well. So they are a crucial part of these negotiations, which is why Doha has been one centre for the negotiations to take place. The Egyptians also play a huge role as well, and so the negotiations have flip-flopped between Cairo and Doha as well. There have been some separate negotiations that have taken place in Paris as well. So an awful lot of moving parts, as also which a peace deal can be found. Now, at the crux of it is whether or not this is a permanent ceasefire or something temporary. Now, the Western nations have been talking only about a temporary ceasefire. Remember, at one point, there was all the perhaps ludicrous semantics over a pause and a ceasefire. Well, I think now all sides seem to be talking about the same word, ceasefire. But what they differ on is whether that ceasefire is permanent or temporary. 40 days, 6 weeks seems to be what people are talking about now. Would Israel accept a ceasefire that is longer than that, or a ceasefire which sort of talks about a permanent end to the hostilities? Answer, probably no, because the stated aim of Israel, and you can understand why given what happened on October the 7th, is that Hamas has to be completely destroyed. If you have a permanent ceasefire, then, well, by definition, Hamas in one form or another will remain. So the details of this latest deal are absolutely crucial. We don't have them yet. I hope we'll get them soon.
Well, Mark, again, in the last few seconds, Reuters again reporting something which may appear to be pouring cold water on this proposed deal. An Israeli official saying the Hamas announcement appears to be a ruse to cast Israel as the side refusing a deal, which would appear to suggest that Israel certainly isn't in agreement over this.
Well, I think it's fair to say that both sides in all of this have tried to cast the other as the one failing to come to the table, the one failing to do a deal. Now, maybe this time Israel's accusing Hamas of doing that. It has been the other way around as well. I mean, look, they're talking. That's positive, of course. But every time they talk, they come to the moment of agreement, and then it all falls apart. I would say that this is probably as close as we've ever been to a deal. But it's just very hard to tell at this stage quite what the terms of the deal are, and whether or not the Israelis will accept it. these Israeli officials, I imagine, are speaking in a sort of holding pattern while the man who will make the decision, Prime Minister Netanyahu, does just that. Now, clearly, as I said, he and President Biden spoke this morning on the phone. I imagine that much of that conversation would have been about what we're talking about now. And I imagine President Biden would have put a huge amount of pressure on Netanyahu to accept the terms of this deal. But as we have seen over the course of the past 6 months, American influence, American leverage over Israel, it clearly and demonstrably has its limits.
OK, Mark, for the moment, thank you. I'll let you monitor the situation in DC while we head back to Jerusalem and speak to our correspondent, John Sparks, who's out there for us. So, John, it is a confusing picture, isn't it? On the one hand, we've got Hamas announcing that it has accepted this ceasefire proposal, this Egyptian-Qatari brokered deal to halt the 7-month war with Israel. But on the other hand, we're now hearing that Israeli officials are saying it appears to be a ruse to cast Israel as the side refusing a deal. All this coming, of course, as the situation is incredibly tense in Gaza, with people being ordered to evacuate Rafah as Netanyahu seems intent on carrying out with that ground invasion.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary situation, isn't it, Jonathan? I think what we can say definitively at the moment is that there is not a deal, there is no acceptance, there is no meeting of minds between Hamas and the Israelis. So there isn't a deal. Whether the so-called acceptance by Hamas that we have heard about from their political wing, calling the Qataris, whether their so-called acceptance of a ceasefire deal is part of the negotiations, and I think that is a possibility, the ongoing negotiations, I think that's probably likely. Are there intensive talks going on? Absolutely. We know that. The two sides were involved in talks, although not directly in Cairo over the weekend. It seems that those talks have now moved to Doha. The Americans intimately involved. I can tell you that the head of the CIA, William Burns, he was in Cairo over the weekend. He seems to be involved as well. He's been in Israel as well over the last couple of days. So there are significant talks going on. Just to come back to the most recent report that I'm seeing from the Reuters news agency, Israeli officials saying Hamas announcement appears to be a ruse to cast Israel as the side refusing a deal. I mean, whether this official is privy to the talks, I don't know. We don't know. The state of the talks, again, we don't know whether the Israelis would be willing to agree to a ceasefire that Hamas says it is now willing to agree to. Again, a huge question. Again, what I can say, what we absolutely do know, is that the Israelis are willing, and they have said so, despite what would be massive international pressure, international protest. They are willing to go ahead. They have the intent to go ahead with a major military operation in southern Gaza, the only part of the Gaza Strip that they have not occupied so far. And they began that process early this morning, dropping leaflets on Rafah, the city of Rafah, overcrowded with what? 1.4, 1.5 million civilians in Gaza. They were telling about 100,000 people in the eastern districts of the city to get out, to go to a so-called humanitarian zone, some kilometers to the north on the coast. They seem willing, and they're certainly able to go ahead with that military operation. How that plays in with the ceasefire talks, there will be people tonight saying, hey, look, it could be a negotiating tactic to apply pressure on Hamas. Maybe it's worked. Maybe that's why they've come forward now. They've told the Qataris they're willing to sign up to a deal. But, you know, we've had these very quick comments from the Israelis. We don't know whether the Israeli official being quoted by Reuters, we don't know whether he's intimately connected with the negotiations. Very difficult to know, of course. But it seems unlikely that the two sides are that close. There clearly are major issues. As we were talking earlier, Jonathan, there seems to be an area where the two sides can agree in the short term over a temporary truce in exchange for Israeli hostages being held by Hamas. In the longer term, these questions about the existence of Hamas in Gaza as an organisation, representing Palestinians. Those are much more difficult questions to solve. The Israelis have already said repeatedly that they are committed to eliminating, to destroying Hamas as an organisation.
Yeah, that Israeli official speaking on condition of anonymity to Reuters. So we're still waiting to hear from Israel officially. John, thank you very much for that. We'll let you go and speak to your contacts in the region and try and provide us with some more clarity. Thank you for the moment. Let's speak to Mark Stone.